Welcome to Ike Reads the News, the show where I read the news and tell you what I think about it. So in the last episode, I was talking about radicalization and unity, and at the same time, I pointed out how I thought one side was more to blame for this radicalization than the other. So I understand the irony in this, but I'm going to explain how I think that Republican extremism is a very big problem and how I think that there isn't a good analogy for that on the left. And so again, I think this is a very small minority of Republicans, but I think much of the party is complicit in these types of behaviors. And so this first article is Marjorie Taylor Greene's controversies are piling up, Republicans are quiet. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a freshman congresswoman from Georgia, a Republican. Here you can see that her mask says Trump won because she's in a majority of the Republican Congress members who voted against the election results because their candidate lost. In the last week, there were several videos that surfaced of her from a few years ago. They falsely suggested that 9/11 was a hoax, that President Barack Obama was Muslim, and that the Clintons were guilty of murder, among several other things. And she's been reprimanded for this. There has been some pushback from leaders. She is meeting with Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, next week, and will most likely be stripped of her committee assignment. And beyond losing her committee assignment, she should definitely not be allowed to caucus with the Republicans anymore. She should probably be expelled from Congress. But it's really a question of why was she given a committee seat? Why was she given any credibility to begin with? This is a continuation of everything she's been talking about on the campaign trail and for many years prior to that. Most notably, she is an avid QAnon supporter, which, if you don't know, is a conspiracy theory that the Democratic National Committee runs a global pedophilia cabal and that they eat babies and all these other just completely conspiratorial claims. But none of that mattered. None of her previous racist comments mattered. She was given a committee seat and really given a lot of credibility within the party. And so this article kind of takes us to the other end of the political spectrum. The article is In Wyoming, Cheney faces blowback for vote to impeach Trump. And so it's about Liz Cheney. She's the daughter of Dick Cheney and is currently the number 3 Republican in the House. She obviously voted for the impeachment, and because of that has just been facing blowback in many different ways. This is at a rally where Representative Gates of Florida flew out to Cheyenne, Wyoming to rally against her. About 800 to 1,000 people came. Here there's a sign where it says "Sick of Rhino" or "A Republican in name only," where apparently if you think that a president not ceding power is an impeachable offense, then you do not stand with the Republican Party.
And this really only makes sense thinking about what the Republican Party currently stands for. Anybody who thinks that the Republican Party stands for anything more than just this simple fear-mongering is really projecting their own views onto the party. Admittedly, this is easy to do since the 2020 Republican National Convention didn't even update their party platform. Instead, they were too busy having C-list Republicans swear their allegiance to Trump because all of the serious Republicans either did not want to participate or were speaking at the DNC. As I said earlier, I don't think this type of extremism is emulated on the left. There are definitely extremists in both parties, but those extremists on the left are not voted into Congress. And so in a crazy-off, it's really unfair to compare anyone to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who suggested that the California fires were most likely started by lasers controlled by Jewish banks, or someone like Matt Gaetz, who suggested that it was most likely left-wing extremists who stormed the Capitol demanding that Donald Trump won. Instead, I'm going to compare AOC, who is viewed as one of the most liberal members in the House, against just some very common mainstream Republican policies, because right now the Republican Party holds such extreme views on these hot-button issues. To do this, I'm going to talk about healthcare and climate change, because those are the two things I typically hear brought up when people talk about how radical AOC is. So AOC is an advocate for Medicare for All, which would guarantee basic healthcare access to all Americans. This would put us in line with all other developed countries in guaranteeing some sort of basic healthcare. I'm going to compare this to the claim that I hear very commonly on the right, that this couldn't work in the United States. And it's not that the richest country in the history of the world shouldn't guarantee this basic human right, but it's that it works in all other countries, that all other countries pay less for healthcare than we do, and they typically have better outcomes. But for some reason, America is so exceptional that it just couldn't work here. And I think that's just an absolutely ridiculous claim. In terms of climate change, AOC agrees with the science that says that Earth is warming due to human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. This will lead to increased rates of flooding and other extreme weather events. To mitigate this, she is proposing a Green New Deal mostly invested into energy and transportation infrastructure. Scientists and economists pretty much resoundingly agree that this would reduce greenhouse gas emissions while increasing the number and quality of jobs. On the other side of the aisle, even moving past the decades of scientific denialism, it is common to say something like, sure, this may be happening, but it would be so expensive to do anything about it. And this claim is just so out of touch with reality. Looking in this article, it's by The Economist, and they're looking at an analysis done by the Economic Intelligence Unit. They found that the global economy would be 3% smaller by 2050 due to a lack of climate resilience. This is in line with other studies that have found something like a 10% reduction by 2100 as these trends start to accelerate. And these losses in GDP obviously represent a loss in the quality of life, but they also represent the loss in human life. It's starvation, it's famine, it's people losing their homes. It's not an extreme position to say, from a pure cost-benefit analysis, it makes more sense to spend money now so we can save money in the future, as well as mitigating all of this loss in human life. What is an extreme position is not being able to muster up $200 billion, especially considering the fact that we spend well over 3 times this on the military, even though climate change is without a doubt a bigger threat than any foreign power. A consultant for Marjorie Taylor Greene once said that the NAACP is the black KKK, only more violent and dangerous. And we all obviously have our own ideas over what is acceptable versus extreme, but I think this comparison of the NAACP and the KKK is the perfect analogy for extremism on both sides.